Good afternoon, and welcome to the fourth in the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships monthly live chat series. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome, and for those who participated in previous chats, welcome back. My name is Salaeha Shariff, and I'm the Director of Recruitment for the Fellowship Program, and I will be moderating today's chat. Each month, the AAAS S&T Policy Fellowships host a live chat with current and alumni fellows to provide you with a glimpse into the fellowship experience and highlight the diversity of disciplines and career stages that are represented in the program. This is also your chance to ask fellows questions about their experiences in the fellowship program, as well as the application process. The focus of today's chat is the Revelle Fellowship in Global Stewardship. The Revelle Fellowship is a unique placement opportunity that allows an accomplished scientist or engineer to help a host office better employ scientific and technical knowledge to environmental policy making. The Revelle Fellow has the opportunity to address global stewardship issues by applying a multidisciplinary background towards solutions to societal problems, including, but not limited to, ecosystems, population, sustainable development, and climate change. Revelle Fellow placements have included a variety of host offices, including the Executive Office of the President, Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, the U.S. Senate, and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, to name just a few. Revelle Fellows have contributed to a variety of projects, including mercury regulations and the implication of nanotechnology on the environment, writing and introducing a bill calling for a tsunami warning system in Southeast Asia, climate change and coral reef degradation, ecological research in land and resource management, monitoring progress toward health-related Millennium Development Goals, and mapping the best route to achieving these goals, as well as the opportunity to collaborate with media outlets to bring a historical perspective to present-day problems. Revelle Fellows, with the guidance and support from the Fellowship Program, identify their own host office placement. Host offices can include a federal agency, Congress, or a DC-based nonprofit focusing on environmental policy. To apply for the Revelle Fellowship, an applicant must hold a doctoral degree and have a minimum of 3 years of post-PhD professional experience. Applicants with a master's in engineering can apply if they have a minimum of 6 years of post-master's professional experience. The Revelle Fellowship is currently being offered for the 2017-18 fellowship year, and the deadline to apply is November 1st, 2016. Today, I'm pleased to announce that we have 2 alumni of the Roger Revelle Fellowship joining us today. The first alumni is Franklin Carrero-Martínez. Franklin was a 2012-13 Roger Revelle Fellow at the U.S. Department of State. As a Revelle Fellow, Franklin managed the U.S.-Pakistan Science Cooperation Program and provided technical leadership and guidance to senior leadership on science and technology issues around the globe to formulate initiatives and to create effective partnerships and leverage resources. Franklin was also a 2013-14 Executive Branch Fellow at the U.S. Department of State, where he was the acting science counselor at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City. He is currently a program director in the Office of International Science and Engineering at the National Science Foundation. Franklin holds a PhD in biology. Our second alumnus joining us today is Jamie Reaser. Jamie was a 2003-04 Roger Revelle Fellow at the Smithsonian Institution in conjunction with the United Nations Development Program. As a Revelle Fellow, she worked on designing and establishing a Sustainable Development Institute to provide training to delegates at global conferences on the scientific, technical, and policy aspects of sustainable development. Prior to Revelle Fellowship, Jamie was also a AAAS S&T Policy Fellow in the Executive Branch at the U.S. Department of State. Jamie currently serves as the Executive Director of the National Invasive Species Council. In addition to guiding all aspects of the NISC Secretariat operations, Jamie also oversees leadership to develop an Arctic invasive alien species strategy and action plan and raise the capacity of other governments to more effectively institutionalize invasive species programs. Jamie is a globally recognized expert on invasive species, as well as a wide range of other environmental and sustainable development issues. Jamie holds a PhD in biology from Stanford University. Thank you both for joining us today. So this is your opportunity to ask questions and hear from Jamie and Franklin as they discuss their experiences as Revelle Fellows and how it has impacted their career paths. You can submit a question at any time by clicking in the question box and typing your question there. Please try to keep your question short and direct it to a particular individual or both Jamie and Franklin. And we'll try to get to as many questions as possible today. So I wanted to start by asking both of you, the question is sort of what prompted you to apply to the Revelle Fellowship? I know that Jamie, you applied to the Revelle Fellowship after having completed an executive branch fellowship at the State Department. And then Franklin, you applied to the Revelle Fellowship sort of at the start of your fellowship, at the start of your two-year fellowship. So can you talk a little bit about sort of what intrigued you about the Roger Revelle Fellowship? So Jamie, I'll have you go first.
Okay, thanks so much. From my perspective, I was looking for an opportunity to bring multiple facets of my career paths into a single opportunity focused in the sustainable development and conservation arena. My background's in biology. I also have a background in communications, psychology, and capacity building from a leadership development perspective and programmatic development perspective. Much of my career has been tracked such that my skill sets have been needed in some positions, but not necessarily in combination in any single position. So the Revelle Fellowship provided me with an opportunity to bring all of my interests and skill sets into one set of outcomes and objectives.
Great, and then Franklin, you?
So for me at the time, I was a professor at the university. I had a lab doing neurobiology research, and I was coming up on a sabbatical year. And I wanted to do something that I would normally not be able to do. So going to like the Department of State and the other places that I interviewed at the time were things that, you know, it's not easy to get to unless you have a unique opportunity like the Revelle Fellowship, also attached to the prestige of the fellowship itself. So under normal circumstances, you don't have access to some of these places and start a career there. So I wanted to explore and see if that was something for me. Bringing together my experience in science, multidisciplinarity, STEM education, and other aspects, as Jamie is saying, bringing together different things that I was doing, different interests. The fellowship allowed me that opportunity.
Great. So the focus, as I mentioned, for the Revelle Fellowship is sort of global stewardship issues, and as Jamie, as you mentioned, it does, you know, usually the Revelle Fellow has a very multidisciplinary background, and that's what allows you to be able to kind of succeed in the Revelle Fellowship placement. So can you both talk about some of the issues that you worked on as a Revelle Fellow and which one sort of fell under the realm of global stewardship? So Jamie?
Sure. One project that I focused on throughout my fellowship time in combination with the Smithsonian Institution United Nations Development Program, our interest was in developing an institute series, a virtual institute, a mobile institute, if you want to call it that, that traveled from UN meeting to UN meeting to help build the capacity of participants, particularly developing country participants and indigenous peoples in the UN negotiations. The courses that we put together were taught by scientific and technical experts who also had backgrounds in teaching and training, whether that was coming out of academic institutions or sustainable development institutions such as UNDP, to pull together negotiators a few days before the negotiations actually started to not only build their capacity on the topics at hand, but their ability to communicate their positions more effectively within the negotiation context. Those programs took place around the world over the course of the 12 months, and then continued for 3 years beyond that.
Great. And Franklin, I know that you, through your Revelle Fellowship, actually had a chance to work on some science collaborations with U.S. and Pakistan, and spent some time actually in Pakistan. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So that was one of the portfolios that it fell under the sustainable development aspect of the fellowship. There, when I was at State, I coordinated the U.S.-Pakistan Cooperation Science and Technology Cooperation Program. We issued 2 separate calls for projects, and they were in the areas of green chemistry, sustainable and green energy, biology education, and health-related issues. That was in collaboration with the Academy, the National Academy of Sciences, Science Ministry in Pakistan, the Higher Education Commission in Pakistan, and the embassy over there. We organized actually 2 conferences as well to educate professors and the community as to how to put together competitive proposals, how to identify collaborators here in the U.S., and how to move forward with collaboration. As you probably are aware that we had some security and continue to have some security challenges in Pakistan. So we wanted to have strong collaborations and people-to-people exchanges that would enable the science to move forward. So that took the side route of developing into something on science diplomacy, which is something that we spent a significant amount of time making sure that in spite of the diplomatic difficulties, we were able to get the scientists together so that they could advance their research. Great.
So one of the questions that we just received is, how has the Revelle Fellowship impacted you? So I think the question was asking in terms of, what do you see as impact on your professional, your career path, so where you are today, and some of the lessons that you learned from your Revelle Fellowship that you continue to use in your current positions? So Jamie, start with you.
Gosh, there are lots of different ways to answer this question. One of the things the fellowship did for me was reinforce the fact that my interests in terms of how I take my career forward are very much grounded in the interdisciplinary approach, that it's important for me to find career opportunities that allow me to show up not just as the biologist, but also as the psychologist, also as the programmatic developer and capacity builder of the different constituencies that I work with. So that's made me very conscious as I choose positions moving forward to make sure that all of me can show up in those positions. It's also been very rewarding through time to see the actual outcomes of the work that I did during the fellowship process. For example, one of the courses that we taught in partnership with the Equator Initiative at the Convention on Biological Diversity meeting in Kuala Lumpur a number of years ago was explicitly designed to help indigenous leaders and local peoples to find a voice within the Convention on Biological Diversity negotiations. At that point in time, they were not even permitted into the negotiating room, let alone to speak on behalf of delegations at the microphone. Now I go to Convention on Biological Diversity meetings, and some of those students are my colleagues. They are leaders within the process. They are taking the microphone and taking the microphone with a lot of confidence and ability to speak to their concerns in a way that is influencing policy around the world. That's tremendously rewarding to see on a day-to-day basis in my life at this point in time.
That must be really gratifying. So Franklin, the same question to you is, how do you feel that the Revelle Fellowship has impacted your professional career?
Again, in a lot of different ways. First is the network. You have access to a lot of different people from all walks of life, different experiences, different viewpoints. So only on that part you have your worldview is expanded so greatly that I don't think you, not only at a professional level, but maybe even at a personal level, you're a completely different person after the experience. Professionally, again, you start seeing opportunities, other jobs, other places where you can see all of your skills coming together in a useful, productive way. And after you see that, after you get that kind of exposure, at least for me, it was hard to go back and envision myself going back to the university. In the teaching room, you have an impact of 30 students at the time. When, as Jamie said, I also had the opportunity to do some negotiations on behalf of the U.S. When you're sitting there agreeing on language for an initiative, or when you're behind the scenes trying to build consensus, you know that what you're doing will have large-scale impact, a global impact, in fact. And it's a different perspective. It's a different layer in which you're contributing to making the world a better place.
Great. And so the next question is sort of about the day-to-day life as a fellow. So could you maybe describe a typical day in the life of a Revelle Fellowship, and maybe some examples of how your work has impacted the agencies that you work at?
So I don't think there is a typical day in the life of anybody working probably in any of the fellowships, maybe not in DC as a whole. And maybe that's part of what a typical day is like. They are atypical. Anything can come your way on any given day, and perhaps even better stated, any given hour on any given day. In order to succeed in I'd say any of the fellowships, you've got to have a willingness to be flexible, to retool in a moment's notice, both in terms of the issue that you're working on, but also your approach to addressing that issue. I think one of the other characteristics of the work is the number of people from the number of different agencies and organizations that you need to have contact with on any given day. It can be pretty staggering when you start thinking about the number of colleagues that come into your network, both professionally and over the long term, personally. Tremendous number of friends were made through the AAAS fellowship programs. It's unlike any other experience. I think that's safe to say.
Great. And Franklin, would you say the same, that there is no typical day?
There's no typical day, particularly when you're working with countries, 10 time zones away from yours. You need to be flexible. Sometimes we were getting up at 2 in the morning to be on a video conference call, half dressed, from here up.
It's a benefit of webinars, right?
Yes. And as Jamie said, you just have to be flexible and open. I think another aspect for me was that sometimes, you could have a personal opinion, but when you're representing the government, your agency, there's a position for the agency, and you have to sometimes put aside your own personal views and opinion. And if you're in that job, in that role, you need to adopt the position of the government, since you're representing the government. And sometimes that, as scientists, it could be a little bit challenging, because, at least for me, coming from academia, where I could say whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, however I wanted, that was something that, takes some time to get used to.
So one of the questions we just received is, in reflecting back on your fellowship experience, is there anything that you would do differently if you had to do the fellowship again? So Jamie, maybe I'll pose that one to you first.
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything that I would do differently. I think one piece of advice kind of comes out of my situation having been pretty unique in that I already had well-established relationships in Washington, already had a very good sense of the outcomes I wanted from the fellowship. So a piece of advice coming out of that for people who are interested in the fellowship and don't already have an established network in DC or a sense of what's feasible for the fellowship would be to do as much legwork as you can to identify colleagues that are going to be supportive mentors and institutions that are really going to enable you to maximize the opportunity of the fellowship, to well position you to capitalize on the 1 year. It's only 1 year. So even losing a month of time in the fellowship because you're not well positioned or you need to spend time just dreaming up the project is going to set you back from the full potential of the opportunity.
Great advice. And then Franklin, anything that you would do differently?
I don't know if there's anything I would have done differently, and this is something that perhaps the incoming fellow would have to deal with. I did my Revelle Fellowship during a transition year. So even though it was, there was no party line, but there was a change in the Department of State. Hillary went out of the Department of State, Kerry came on board, and there was a shift in priorities, and you had to adapt and you have to be flexible. So one of the things that the initial project that I had in mind quickly evolved and changed into something else as the new priorities became clear with the new leadership at the Department of State. So that's something that I would say you have to be flexible, and particularly in a transition year. You may even have a plan, you may even have something that you want to work with, but depending on who comes on board, priorities will change or will be modified, so you have to be flexible. The other thing would be, in my case, I did not have a network here in DC, so start cultivating that. A lot of people are really open and flexible. I was fortunate to have good mentors that I could find and identify early on, and those were key in making my experience a success and getting connected and getting the right people in the other parts of government, other offices that make my projects move forward better, faster, and with a greater ease.
Great. So I wanted to kind of just ask a question now about the placement process. So the Revelle Fellowship is also unique in that the Revelle Fellow has the freedom under the guidance of the fellowship program to be able to identify his or her own host office. So can you both speak to that a little bit? I know that you kind of alluded to that, Jamie, and then Franklin as well, through the networks that you had or the mentors and the guidance, but can you speak a little bit about how you found your host office placement and how that process worked? And then what advice would you give to the incoming Revelle Fellow in terms of identifying a good fit and a good home for the Revelle Fellowship year?
In my case, I already had a pretty clear idea of what I wanted to accomplish, had been selected for the Revelle, and I knew which organizations in Washington had the greatest potential of taking that work forward. So I simply reached out to a series of colleagues, got together with them over lunch, put my ideas forward, let them know that they were of interest to me in terms of working with them through the Revelle process, and then ultimately negotiated the opportunity with the international program at the Smithsonian Institution.
And then Franklin, how did you approach finding your replacement at the State Department?
So I knew two of my friends that were here way back from high school and undergrad. So I reached out to them, and they were very kind in providing me some contacts. I did have an idea of the places that I wanted to go to. So I started emailing people before I got here to Washington for the placement week. So I had a sense of where I wanted to start the conversation, and I was not shy about asking them for other places where they would recommend, places where they may have contacts or with similar missions and vision to what I wanted to accomplish. As probably most of the fellows will see, or prospective fellows, the government websites in particular could be very cryptic, and you read a mission and a vision of an office and it will tell you nothing. So it is important to have some insights and understand maybe the politics of the place if you can, and that would be key information that would make your fellowship or maybe the projects that you're working on. From the outside, sometimes things look like, great, this is a great idea, but on the inside there may be internal politics or other things that you may not be aware of that could have an impact on your project. So having that legwork before you arrive to Washington, for me, was key in identifying a good place to land.
So this next question kind of expands a little bit on what you both already spoke about, and so in having that network. So for those who might not have that already established network, how much of a disadvantage is it when you're kind of coming in without an established DC network? And are there any specific resources that you would recommend to people in terms of identifying or building their network? And then maybe could you also speak a little bit about how AAAS supported you through your Revelle Fellowship placement?
I think it certainly has the potential to be a disadvantage if you don't make the effort to strategically make the contacts ahead of time and think through very carefully what you want to achieve during the Revelle process so that you can align your goals and objectives with the most appropriate institution, the most appropriate mentors, etc. One of the best resources available is the network of AAAS fellow alumni. There are a lot of us in Washington. We, I think, use the network pretty successfully in a lot of different ways, from career opportunities to collaborating on projects. And I think I can speak for probably the vast majority of the fellows that we're very interested in serving as mentors and facilitators for others coming into the program. I would suggest that potential candidates who have a sense of what they would like to do reach out to AAAS, express at least their general theme of interest. Maybe it's climate change related, maybe it's water security, etc., and ask that they be introduced to alumni who are based in DC working in those topic areas, and then we can help figure out where it makes the most sense for them to target in terms of agencies, help them network to other alumni, and to individuals who would be willing to serve mentorship roles in a way that really helps them maximize the fellowship. And I certainly encourage candidates to look to AAAS fellow alumni as mentors, because we know how challenging it can be to come into the culture of science policy in DC, how to come into it effectively and quickly. And we're certainly invested in individuals getting the most of their experience.
And then Franklin, what advice do you have?
So I agree that not having a network to begin with could be a disadvantage. So another way, if you're a member of a professional society, maybe reaching out. Most of them have offices here in DC. Most of them have either a congressional liaison or someone doing advocacy or lobbying, depending on the organization. So if you're a member, that's another resource that you may have. Reach out to them, send them an email, have a call, pick their brains, maybe start asking for suggestions. of people, places, offices that you could potentially start reaching out. Again, as Jamie says, the network, the fellows network, or as we like to refer to it, the mafia, it's there to to help. If you email anyone, you can find them through LinkedIn, Twitter, or whatever, and you say that you want to, or you're interested in becoming a fellow, I have no doubt and no hesitation that people will step up and help any way they can, provide candid advice, and give you all of the information that you need. So if you don't have a network, that would be one way. At the flip side, not having a network could be maybe a little bit of an advantage, because you may not be biased by what's going on, and you can use that as an opportunity. You can't be naive, so you need to do some legwork and try to identify some of the issues, but that could give you the advantage that you're an outsider coming with fresh ideas and new approaches to things. So that's something that if you don't have a network, you can also leverage.
And also to that, I wanted to add, so the Revelle Fellow, there is a program manager that works with the Revelle Fellow. That program manager is Kira Mock. So she will help the fellow in terms of establishing some of those networks and identifying an appropriate host office. So for those of you who don't already have that established DC network, the AAAS Fellowship Program does provide resource and guidance through that process. So another question that we just received is, I think, so reflecting on your previous position, so I guess prior to the fellowship, did you know or did you have an idea that you wanted to leave what you were previously doing and going into something more policy-oriented? So Franklin, I think I'll pose that to you first, because I know that you were in academia and you kind of transitioned away from that now.
Yeah, so at the beginning, no, I had no idea, and in fact, I wanted to do something different just to give it a try. As a faculty member, I could have come to NSF, NIH, and other government agencies and land in the role that I have now, for example. So I wanted to use the fellowship as an opportunity to explore something different. And it is a year, it's a protected time with a prestigious organization like AAAS. So even if I went back to academia, to my previous role, that would have not been viewed negatively. Then at the end of that first year, the office wanted me to stay for an extra year, and that's when I applied for the DSD track on the Policy Fellowship. And then at the beginning of that second year, that's when I started maybe questioning whether or not I wanted to go back. I was having a good time. It was a lot of work, but I was having a good time. I was enjoying what I was doing. I was challenged in many ways in different aspects of my professional self and also at the personal level. So then I started maybe halfway through the second year really thinking about that I wanted to find other opportunities and perhaps make the career transition. But at the beginning, before knowing other things, it was hard to say, yes, I want to leave or no. As a professor, I heard a lot of people saying, it's really difficult, where you're working hard, you're working all the time, it's hard to get grants, it's hard to get money. But then when I went to the Department of State, there's a lot of people that work really hard, that they're working all the time. If you're traveling, you're jet lagged most of the time. So if you're leaving academia because you don't want to do the hard work, then don't come to government, because you may end up working even more.
Great advice. So Jamie, is there anything that you wanted to add? I know you were doing a little bit more policy even prior to the Revelle Fellowships.
I was. So I'll speak a little bit to the diplomacy transition, because I think the story's similar. I had, up until that point in time, no sense that I would end up in Washington, D.C. for the majority of my career working at the science policy interface. I'd been at the Smithsonian before I went off to do my doctorate. I had a position at the Smithsonian when I finished my doctorate. Those were largely domestically based programs, and I had a strong interest in working at the international level. So when I learned about the Science and Diplomacy Fellowships at the State Department, that piqued my interest in an opportunity to shift my career to more of an international focus. Ended up, of course, doing that, and it changed the course of my career direction indefinitely. There's a relatively small niche in the conservation community for people that have the experience working at the interface of science and policy from the international perspective, and particularly with UN negotiation experience. And even though I have at times tried to move out of that, I keep getting called back into it because there just aren't that many of us out there with those capacities.
So for those in our listening audience today who are maybe still in graduate programs, what advice would you give them as they think about, applying for either the AAAS S&T Policy Fellowship or just other, policy fellowship opportunities? What should they be doing now in terms of their graduate experience that would prime them for a policy fellowship experience? So Franklin, how about we start with you on that?
So I think if your university has any kind of policy-related coursework, that's something that you should consider. Engage in extracurricular activities either through professional societies, maybe a local representative office or something. Gain some experience so that you start seeing and understanding what is it like, and maybe you go and you find out that this is not for you, so you can find other opportunities and maximize your time. Or if it's something that when you volunteer, you find out that you really, really like, then you come or you can apply to the fellowship coming to Washington with a better understanding of what's really feasible, what you can really accomplish in a year, and set your expectations that way. And that would be also another way in which you can start building your own network as you come to Washington.
Yeah, I think that expectation advice is key. So Jamie, what advice do you have?
I think those are all good points. If someone has a sense of where they would like to be placed for a fellowship, I'd encourage them to start following the issues at that institution. All of the departments have blogs where they're regularly posting information on high priority initiatives, so get a sense of what's currently important to the department under the current administration. Follow the science and policy news that's being generated out of Washington. Politics do play a particularly important role in everything we do here. For people who are earlier in their academic training, whether that's undergrads or maybe early graduate school, I'd encourage people to look into internship opportunities in DC. So for example, at the Department of Interior, where my office is based, there are programs called Pathways internships that are 10 weeks long during the summer, and that can enable people not only to get a sense of what life in Washington is like, but a sense of what skill sets would be really useful to gain in advance of applying for a fellowship. From my perspective, communication is one of those skill sets that isn't necessarily gained through traditional academic programs, but is absolutely vital to succeed in DC, and that's both verbal communication but also written communication. Knowing how to very succinctly and accurately deliver science to high-level policy decision makers is an art. And the more that people can invest in their writing careers and their public speaking skill sets, the more successful that they'll be in the fellowship.
Great. I like that, the science communication as an art. So just as a reminder to all our participants, we have about 15 minutes or so left on this chat, so please do submit your questions. It could be about the Revelle Fellowship or as well as just generally about any of the other 6 program areas within the fellowship. So because the focus of this chat is the Revelle Fellowship, can you talk a little bit about how to draft a competitive application for the Revelle Fellowship and how that application differs maybe perhaps from the applications that you both drafted for an executive branch placement? So Franklin, how about we start with you on that one?
Yeah, so I think for me, when I was putting this together, one of the first things that I realized is that I've done this before. It's just in academia, it's called different. It's different. So for example, if you think about writing an abstract to an annual meeting of your choice, you use the same part of your brain to in a condensed way, convey the message of your results. So once I understood that I've done this before, then the memo and the formatting and all of that became easier in a sense to approach. So as Jamie said, you need to convey your message in a succinct way to different layers of leaders. Some may not be experts, so you have to write something a little bit more general. Some others may actually be experts down the weeds of whatever issue that you're writing on, so you need to have in a concise document different layers of information targeting different audiences, and all of the styles and grammar, and grammar is important, but all of the styles and all of this literature artsy thing you can leave out of the door and go to the point and in a clear manner. So again, similar to writing an abstract for an annual meeting or a conference that you go to. So that was, I guess, one of the main challenges in putting this together. And not having prior experience in writing a memo at the time. But again, also reaching out to your network and trying to get advice. People were very helpful in helping me frame the issue in such a way. So reaching out to people out there and get their advice and input was key in putting a successful application.
And Jamie, how did you approach your Revelle application?
I'll caveat this in that the application process may have changed since the 2003 class, and let me speak to it from the perspective of having been a reviewer of Revelle applications several years ago. I think the most successful candidates had some commonalities in their applications. One, they were very clearly able to enunciate what they wanted to get out of the fellowship, but also what they wanted to contribute through the fellowship that was beyond a personal interest. In other words, what could they offer of service to their host institution and potentially even to the program that their particular mentor was guiding. They had clearly done their homework. They were using terminology that was very, Washington-esque. They were mentioning specific programs that were relevant to the institution or institutions they were interested in. So clearly they had done some research. They presented a vision and a strategy for how they would maximize the period of the internship, while at the same time communicating that they were willing to be flexible and fit their interests and expertise into opportunities that might arise over the course of the interview process or upon entry into the host institution. So in each case, there was kind of a two-track approach. Here's what I can envision doing from where I stand now and how I think I can contribute, but I'm also willing to be flexible and look for new opportunities that I may not be able to detect from where I'm sitting right now.
Thank you. So Franklin, this question is actually specifically for you. The questioner says that you mentioned earlier in your comments that as a government employee, you have to put your personal positions aside and stand behind the position of the government. So how much say do you have in shaping that position? And is there a lot of turnover when there are major changes in leadership, or is much of your work invariant of that side of politics?
So the issues that I was working on, we had a set policy that was not related to party politics, if that's where the question is coming from. So at the Department of State, there's a clearance process, so you provide your input and you shape that process in a way, but once the agreement is, and even here at NSF, we have positions for a variety of topics. So once that position is set, then when you're outside representing the agency, that's the position that you have to uphold and defend. So there is a process, internal process, and you have the opportunity to shape that process. But once you're outside, you have to stick to the talking points.
Jamie, is there anything that you wanted to add to that, sort of given your current role at NISC?
I think it's well stated. I've certainly had situations where the way I would have preferred to go forward on specific issues and policy initiatives wasn't necessarily consistent with the context or the broader team that I was working with. And I think those kind of situations are opportunities that the fellowship provides. It's real life experience to have to bring perspectives together from many different constituencies and backgrounds and move towards a common goal. And that's one of the advantages of being in a democratic system, and certainly one of the skill sets that I think most fellows emerge from the fellowship process with.
So this next question is asking about whether an applicant needs to have extensive professional experience and expertise directly in the topic that they're interested in pursuing. So I wanted to answer that, and then Jamie and Franklin, if you wanted to kind of add to that. So with regards to the fellowship program, the Revelle Fellowship is geared more towards advanced or mid-career applicant, but that is not a requirement to apply. The minimum requirement is that you have to have the PhD as well as 3 years of post-PhD experience in order to apply to the Revelle Fellowship. For all the executive branch or congressional fellowship placements, the minimum requirement is just completing your PhD at the time of the application deadline, which is November 1st each year. So you don't need to necessarily have extensive professional experience or expertise, but you do want to demonstrate that you have an interest in policy and what you've done to further that interest, whether that opportunities that focus and highlight your leadership skills or your communication skills, both in and outside of academia. Jamie and Franklin, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to highlight in response to that question, and whether extensive professional experience or expertise is required. And I think for this question would be generally for the fellowship program and not specifically to Revelle.
I think it's actually, I think, a great point to consider in the context of the Revelle, because the Revelle provides an opportunity to potentially retool or redirect a career. So if somebody has a resume that is largely speaking to expertise in water policy, but through time they have developed a real interest in climate change as a thematic area of focus. The Revelle might provide the opportunity to find a placement where they can draw off of their experience more generally, but step into programs that are explicitly climate change focused, gain a greater capacity to work on those issues, both technically and through the network that they build, and then move their career in a different, perhaps more preferable direction post-fellowship. So in that case, they wouldn't come in as, per se, climate change experts, but they would certainly be bringing broader scientific and technical expertise to the institution that was supporting them.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think the Revelle in particular provides that unique opportunity. So having expertise, that's what's going to get you out in front of world leaders, policymakers, senior leadership, and that's what gives you the possibility of retooling your career. So I would say that having the expertise and having the credibility and credentials, at least for the Revelle Fellowship, it's very important. Again, also, you're during placement, you're trying to convince an office that you will be coming on board and pretty much from day one become a valuable member of their team, and you're able to contribute. And in that sense, having that kind of expertise becomes really important in convincing an office. The other fellowship tracks, there are descriptions. Offices have needs that they're expressed in a document that you can read. If you like it, you go interview there. If you don't like it, then you pass that opportunity and go somewhere else. But Revelle is unique in that sense. You and your resume are your what you present to them and try to convince them that you will be a valuable member to their mission. So expertise, at least for the Revelle, is very important.
And Franklin, I know you didn't return to academia, but could you maybe give advice for, specifically in looking at the Revelle Fellowship and faculty who may be considering it as sort of a sabbatical year opportunity, is how this would enhance a career in academia and what faculty would be able to take back to their academic institutions from the Revelle experience?
So I think the first question that prospective applicants need to be thinking about is that, are you doing this to, what's your purpose in taking a year off from whatever you're doing, research, teaching? So if you think that you want to, or maybe think that you want to switch careers, then you need to be strategic about your placement. You need to go in an office that will give you the kind of visibility to get to where you may want to go next. Or even if you want to go back to the university, let's say that now you are at a point in your career where you may want to become a dean or a provost, or you have that kind of aspiration. So there may be offices where you will have that kind of responsibilities that will position you when you go back to academia to start looking and aspiring for those kind of positions. Let's say that you end up in a government office dealing with global affairs. Well, when you go back to the university, you can help your university internationalize. I know that there's a lot of universities doing that. So if you're thinking about going back to academia in a different role, then be strategic. If you plan to stay or transition to government or other sectors, also you need to be strategic. So I think you need to do the legwork and trying to figure out before you start this process and before you come on board, what is it that you really want to do and why you're taking a year off.
Great advice. So we're actually coming now towards the end of our hour here, and so I wanted to first of all, thank both Jamie and Franklin for joining us today. And then Jamie and Franklin, before we sign up, do you have any advice just generally for people that are considering, opportunities in science policy and, through the AAAS fellowship program? Do you have any sort of parting advice for prospective applicants?
Start filling out your application.
Very good, I like that.
It's a fabulous program. I can't say enough good things about it. And, on behalf of the Alumni Network, we're here to help.
Absolutely. I would also say be flexible and be open-minded. If you're into change your career, or even if you go back and continue to do the same, your career is not going to be the same. You have a completely different perspective, a completely different worldview of how things work in government that will inform your career back in academia. If you're going to write grants, you'll write better grants because now you can make your proposal policy relevant. And that is big when you're looking to fund something. You'll understand priorities, you'll understand what's going on, you'll understand trends for the next 2 or 3 years. So even if you go back, you'll be well placed to advance your career. So take advantage of the opportunity.
Great, thank you both. And I also wanted to thank you, our audience, for joining us and for all your great questions today. If we weren't able to answer your questions, please email us at fellowships@AAAS.org. And then plan to join us on August 31st for the 5th chat in the series, where you'll hear about the Judicial Branch Fellowship. And that chat will actually feature an alumnus of the Judicial Fellowship, along with a representative from the Federal Judicial Center, who will be discussing the contributions that judicial fellows have made to the judiciary. You can also find a list of upcoming chats in the series, as well as all on-demand links for previous chats, by going to the fellowship's website and going to the chat page. And as a reminder, we are currently accepting applications for the 2017-18 fellowship year, and the deadline to apply is November 1st. And specifically for the Revelle Fellowship, that will only be offered during the 2017-18 fellowship year. So if you are interested in applying to the Revelle program area, this is the year to apply. And then visit the fellowship's website for more information and details related to the application process. And like Jamie said, get started on your application. And thank you all for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you very much.